The shir is dedicated Elul nishmat Harav David Yaakov ben Emmanuel and to Nava bat Harav David Yaakov Hashem Yikom Damam. The 13th day of Elul of this year will mark 20 years since the murder of Dr. David Applebaum and his daughter Nava. That happened the night before Nava's wedding. Happened to be at Kever Rachel earlier this year in the summer, and I davened there. And when it came out, my daughters, my wife, were in the women's section. I asked my daughters to go back in to bring me back a picture of one of the parochot that's hanging there in one of the places inside, and it's made out of the dress of the wedding dress that Nava Applebaum Shem Kom Dama was not zocha to wear. And on top, there's a moniker. It says Kala Lanetzach, and she's the bride for all time. Lives interrupted. These were people, obviously in the case of Nava, she was younger, not as accomplished as her father, but in her own right, she worked for Zichron Menachem, Shirut Leumi, helping kids with cancer. Dr. David Applebaum was well known. I spoke about him on Yom Kippur last year. I actually want to build out of what I spoke about in that drush, learn a little more in depth as a sugya, as a topic. He was a person who got a master's in biology from right here, Northwestern, and medical school in Ohio. He made Aliyah in the early 80s, 81. He learned in the Skokie Yeshiva. He was a Talmud Mufak of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik Zatzal. And one of the founders, aside from being the head of the emergency medical department at Yahrzeit, he's one of the founders of Terra, which is a whole system that revolutionized emergency medicine, Adi Yamazeh in Eretz Yisrael. He was also the head of Magen David Adom in Yerushalayim for 10 years before he became the director at Yahrzeit. I'm told that Adi Yamazeh, his picture is on the wall at Yahrzeit Hospital for everything that he did, that he stood for. His friends and family and anything I could find online, they describe him as a healer, very warm personality, affable. He saved countless people's lives. He was also well known as a great Talmid Chacham. And feel it's so important. We feel as Klal Yisrael, it's so important not just to remember the person died or was murdered, Lo Aleinu, as he was and his daughter was, the 13th of Elul, 5763. So this is 20 years. She was murdered on the night, and he was murdered the night before her wedding at a cafe Hillel in Yerushalayim. They'd gone out, father, daughter. We should also think about the Torah that he taught. In addition to his work in medicine, he was known to be a great Talmid Chacham. As I said, a Talmud of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. It's actually a sefer, which we have here in the shul, called David Avdi. And the sefer is all the different Torah that he wrote, that the family, I believe it was the family, put together. So what I want to study now, what I want to learn, is a few pieces from his last Kol Nidre Drasha, which he gave at the beginning of 5763 in Yerushalayim at Ohel Rivka, which, if you're not familiar, it's a 5-minute walk, maybe less. Actually, it's really around the corner from Beit HaNasi, the president's house. So if you have sort of an awareness of Yerushalayim. And I think there are some important lessons for us to think about and to consider that he delivered this the year before he left the world. He actually describes in that drasha that it was different for him to come to a Yom Kippur where his father and his Rebbe Mufak had both passed away in the same year, that past year in Tafshin Samach Bet. And here was coming to Tafshin Samach Gimel in order to speak a little bit before Kol Nidre. He did each year at Ohel Rivka. So I thought we would learn a little bit of his Torah today, and that's what the sources are about. And for our consideration and to give us some pause as we're going into the Yom Noraim. In Slichot that we were reciting very soon, and each Elul that we recite, we have a section known as the Vidui, which begins with a preamble. We know the Vidui as Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazal, etc. But then the Al-Chaitz that we're reciting Yom Kippurim, the truth is, it begins with the phrase that appears as the preamble. Right? The God of our forefathers. May our prayer come before you. Do not ignore or look away, if you will, our petition or supplication, because we're not arrogant, we're not stubborn to the point where we could say before you, Hashem, our God and the God of our fathers, we are tzaddikim and we have not sinned. We don't have that kind of arrogance. So we appeal to Hashem as our God and the God of our forefathers. Then we say, we admit we're not going to be arrogant, to say we never sinned to you, our God, our God and the God of our forefathers. But then what do we say? Aval, meaning here not but yet, meaning alas, right? We understand that we have sinned, and our fathers have sinned. We have sinned, and our forefathers have sinned. And there's something here when you look at that. Everything until now, is a little bit of a question, right? We're talking about our forefathers sinning. We're confessing for our forefathers. I always try to remind myself, I think it's based on the drasha of the Rav Soloveitchik. Aval, the word aval is like the brother standing before Yosef. Aval Ashemim anachnu, right? But it's not but. It's truly. We admit. We realize. We're confronting the facts. Anachnu, aval Ashemim anachnu. We're guilty about not taking care of Yosef when he cried out to us. That's the psukim in Parashat Miketz. But what does it mean that we're going to recite? Aval anachnu va'avotenu chatanu. So this was the beginning of the drasha, the Kol Nidre drasha, the first inset from Dr. Applebaum's words. He said, I waited patiently, but with some measure of excitement to say those words at the Vidui Harishon, to be able to say them on the night of Yom Kippurim, the night where the sunset is different than all the other sunsets. This sunset will bring us to the day of Slich Mechila Kapara, forgiveness, expiation, atonement for the whole Jewish nation. And the mitzvah of the day is the affirmative mitzvah, is to recite the Vidui. Right? There are a lot of mitzvot on the day of Yom Kippurim, right? The 5 inuyim, the things we don't do in terms of the fast and staying away from malacha. We don't do things on Yom Kippurim. It's Shabbat, Shabbaton, right? They both have an Isser Karet attached to them. But the mitzvah, the affirmative mitzvah that we arise and perform, that's the mitzvah of Vidui. He goes on to quote the Rambam. I'm giving you some excerpts, but he then says the second inset here. We say we're not arrogant enough to say we didn't sin. So we say, oh, but we and our forefathers have sinned. Is it nice? Is it appropriate to mention the sins of our forefathers? Our forefathers, again, this is the year when he had lost his father and his Rebbe Mufak, had both passed away in the same year. They're the greatest tzaddikim. They're the purest people. Im anu bnei adam harehem k'malachim. We're like people. They're like angels. They have an angelic quality to them. Eich anachnu me'isim l'machnu v'avatenu chatanu k'shemudubar al avi mori al mori v'rabi harav rabbeinu Aaron al Chavetz Chaim v'Reb Chaim Rabbi Akiva Eger v'Alagon. How can we say this? We're referring to. He says, I'm referring to my own father. I'm referring to my Rebbe. What, the Chavetz Chaim, Reb Chaim of Brisk, Rabbi Akiva Eger, the Gaon of Vilna? No. Al Rambam, Val Rashi, Val Rishonim, Tanaim, V'Morayim, V'Avram, Yitzchak, V'Yaakov. How could this be? But that's exactly what we say, right? It's one thing we're going to say, Elokeinu v'Kei Avotenu, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yisrael, Yaakov, Shemona Esrei. I want to say, Elokeinu v'Kei Avotenu, Tavo Leferecha Tfilatenu. Right? You want to say that they sinned? We all sinned? Well, we're all really guilty. But in Yizkar b'Yalduti, I remember in my childhood, Shai Rosh HaYeshiva, meaning Rav Aaron Soloveitchik Zatzal, Omeid v'tzavach neged hamadalgim hanusach sh'lanachim b'votenu chatanu. He would scream against those who want to skip the nusach. We and our fathers have sinned. So he said, Hanoseh hazeh ma'asikoti me'od hashana v'achalek itchem at asher matzati. So what he went on to do is he said, this is bothering me this year. Sort of I'm involved in this a lot. So I want to share with you what I found, and he's going to share 2 ideas. We'll spend most of our time this morning on the first idea, sort of conclude with the second, not to give it short shrift, but just in terms of some themes to think about, particularly this point, and it's related, of course, to the Parshiyot HaShavua of Elul, both Parshat Shoftim, and of course, there'll be something from Parshat Ki Teitzei as well. So first of all, Parshat Shoftim, which we read just recently. I have on page 2, the story of Egla Arufa. Here, a corpse was found between 2 towns, and all of the elders of the town have to create this whole ceremony in the presence of the townspeople, etc. They're bringing this calf that will be killed, right? Be decapitated, in fact, in a valley called the Nachal Eitan. And I gave you the psukim on page 2 there in the sources. So v'chol ziknei ha'ir hahi hakrovim el hachalal yirchatzu et yadayim al ha'egla ha'arufa b'nachal. They're going to wash their hands. The back of that page. Do you have it? Not to have it there? Page 2. They're going to say, our hands did not shed this blood. It's a sugya in and of itself. But what's added in here? Verse 8, pasuk chet, kaper la'amcha Yisrael asher padita Hashem val titein dam naki b'kerev amcha Yisrael v'nikaper lahem hadam. Right? Atone for your people who you have redeemed, O Lord, and lay not the guilty innocent blood among your people. What does that have to do with the whole Jewish nation? It's like it's a localized thing. You mentioned everybody. Why is that? Right? Why is that the declaration? So here's the Sifri on Parshat Shoftim, the Medrash Halacha. And if you look at the main text on the left-hand side of that scan, you'll see there's a number of lines. We're looking for 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth line. Shehu Omer Asher Padita Hashem Melamed Shekapar Zu Mechaperet Al Yotze Mitzrayim. We learn when the words are spoken, whom you have redeemed, Hashem. You know, atone for your nation, whom you have redeemed. It means that it's even giving atonement to the people who left Egypt. Kaper la'amcha, give atonement to your nation. Elu hachayim, that's the people who are alive. Asher padito, you redeemed. Elu hametim, the people who had come out of Egypt but are no longer alive. They're dead. Mlamed shahametim tzrichim kapara. And the inset here on the right-hand side, the Girsa of the Gra, the Vilna Gaon's edition, has Kaper la'amcha elu hachayim asher padito elu hametim lamed she'af hametim tzrichim kapara u'melamed shekapara zu mechaperet ad yotzei Mitzrayim v'nitzilim medim sheshofech damim chotei ad yetziat Mitzrayim. Right? We learn that the atonement goes all the way back to Yetziat Mitzrayim, to that generation, has a retroactive effect. And we also learn the person, God forbid, who commits murder has committed a sin all the way back to Yetziat Mitzrayim. Cryptic words, but ones that I hope to unpack a little more today. This, what you're looking at here, is actually the source of Yizkor. That's why we have Yizkor. Because we learn from this source that even those who have left the world, their account, so to speak, is not exactly closed. They can't change it anymore, but we can. And this teaches a connection between all of the generations that are linked one to the other. We don't have time ready for the Emek HaNetziv. I'll skip it for now, but turn to page 3. Writes Rabbi Applebaum. And this is from his words. Habir hapashut bioter misovev, excuse me, et ha'akara ki ein anu shayachim la'ela shematzdikim et ha'avot ki ilu she'ein behem avonot. The simple explanation leads us to the recognition that we are not part of the group of people who only see righteousness in our forefathers as if they had no sins. Omnam, tamun b'nefesh kol echad ratzilim u'shlamut. It's true, everyone has within them a desire to be whole, complete. Aval ein zeh davar sigim mamash ela she'ifa v'derech chaim. It's not something on line 3 on page 3. It's not something that we really can. It's an aspiration, but we don't actually get there. V'avotenu gam hitmodadu im yosyonot shebechelkam hitzlichu uvechelkam lo. Our forefathers also contended with tests and trials, some of which they were successful with, and others they did not succeed. As the pasuk says in Kohelet, Ki Adam ein tzadik ba'aretz shel yaseh tov v'lo yachta. There's no person who's so righteous in the land that will do good and not sin. V'gam hametim tzrichim kapara. Even those who have left the world need kapara. Al yedei tshuva uvidu b'yom kippurim anu ma'alim kapara al yekirenu she'avru min ha'olam. Our tshuva, our vidur on our Yom Kippur elevates our loved ones, our precious ones who have left the world. It brings them atonement. And and thereby we serve in a certain way our precious ones in a spiritual way, in a very close spiritual way, in a very deliberate spiritual way. He quotes the same thing we just saw. And he quotes also from Masechet Horiot and Dav Vav, right? It's not it's not just in the Sifri, but even in the Gemara, this kapara goes all the way back to Yetziat Mitzrayim. Rabbi Dr. Applebaum quoted from the Darchei Moshe. That's why Yom HaKippurim, the appropriate name for Yom Kippur, is Yom HaKippurim, and it's in the plural. To remind us, says the Darchei Moshe, Shish kapar l'chaim, v'gam kapar l'meitim. The dead also get atonement. And this is the minhag of Yizkor and Yom Kippur. And you see that the first Yizkor, historically, is not related to Yontif. It's related to Yom Kippur. Dafka Yom Kippur. It was extended afterwards to other holidays, to the last day of the holiday, but not originally so. Many years ago, I gave a Shabbos Shuvah drasha about Yizkor, and we branched off and had a whole discussion about what's happening on other holidays. How did it get there? What was the history of that? Why is it significant? What about all the halachas about people walking out, staying in, etc.? But clearly, aside from Yizkor, just the recitation of Anachnu va'avotenu chatanu is part and parcel of, seems to be part and parcel of what the tefillah, and particularly of the vidui of Yom Kippurim, is all about. There's another source, and Rabbi Applebaum quotes this as well. I don't see it inside. During the psukim, the very harsh psukim of the Tochacha, that's the rebuke, also, God forbid, the consequences, the punishment for not hearkening to Hashem's word, we learn, Va'avadatem ba'goyim va'achlayetchem eretz oivechem, va'nisharim bachem yimaku ba'avonam be'artzot oivechem, va'af ba'avonot avotam itam yimaku. Right? The idea of perishing among the nations, being consumed in the land of the enemies, and whoever's left over is going to be heartsick over what has happened, even about the sins of the forefathers, even on the avon ha'avot. So in verse 40, pasuk mem, vidvaduat avonam vet avot avotam. They were going to confess for their sins and the sins of their forefathers, b'ma'alam asher ma'aluvi, and their trespass, their transgression. Va'af asher halchu imi b'kari, and those who walked with God in a happenstance manner. Carry means without recourse to purposiveness. Simply put, as is here in the translation, hostile, and did things against Hashem, as if God was not with them, or in some way didn't care what they did, etc., etc. It's the notion of the carry. There is already in the Torah, therefore, a few examples where the confessional is a confessional of the individual, but also of the forebear, representing the forebears as well. It's not meant to castigate those who came before. It's not meant to cast them in a negative light. It's simply meant to acknowledge that nobody's perfect, and a healthy appreciation of that, even among those who we venerate as being the greats and the giants upon whose shoulders we stand. At the same time, there's an acknowledgement that as they confessed, we confess. As they had things that they didn't stand up and succeed with, so too we have failed in certain ways, and we're trying to do better and to be better. Moreover, though, is the idea that the connection of generations is such that we don't see time as exclusively linear. We also see a link between past, present, and future, and it's very much on display not only in our vidui, but through our Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah davening, excuse me. So if you turn to the next page from a book that had great impact on me, that we'll see now inside. I'm skipping the Hemek Davar on the right side. We'll come back to in a few minutes. The Emergence of Ethical Man by Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik. Incredible work. So he talks about the brach of Zichronot on Rosh Hashanah, and it behooves us, I guess, to read it inside and to try to understand what Rav Soloveitchik is driving at. The halacha, writes Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, formulated Birkat Zichronot in the Musaf prayer for Rosh Hashanah, and coined a unique blessing, Zocher Habrit, who remembers the covenant, formulated in the present tense. Zikaron as a divine attribute cannot connote any psychological process. It must be understood under a transcendental aspect, meaning it doesn't mean Hashem is remembering like we remembered something. He knows everything already. So there's something else going on here, something transcendental. Zikaron as an attribute of God denotes not remembrance of the past, but its presence, its perennial existence, and everlasting reality. Time does not flow on, but comes to a standstill. Past, present, and future are interwoven. The covenant with Avraham does not lie in a dead past, but in a living present. Zocher habrit describes the actuality and reality of the brit. As a consequence of the perennial brit consciousness, we may speak of a historical, ethical memory. Agreements entered into, obligations assumed, promises made, objectives formulated by the father of the nation are valid and binding for the charismatic group. It means us, the descendants. We remember the ethical duty contained in the covenant. Again, this is not just simple remembrance. It is rather a reacceptance, a re-experience. We assumed our duties through Avram and Moshe. They represented us, and we in turn represent them. And he had said previously, which is part of a book, page 174, he talks about Brit Sinai in this vein as well, that our covenant was not a one-time event, but something that has a cascading impact for every future generation. And so it's true also about Avram Avinu. And so the notion of Zikaron, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is not just the remembrance, it's not the remembrance in the psychological sense of the term of remembering something. I forgot and now I remembered, but rather the placing of past, present, and future all together at the same time. And so this is a process that may culminate on a Yom Kippurim, the Chaim and the Meitim, but it actually begins earlier. Rosh Hashanah is setting the stage for it already. And he goes on to explain this as well. Analyzing this topic in somewhat greater detail, we shall discover another familiar aspect, namely that of ethical solidarity and co-responsibility. Not just for the time now, but for all time. Not just for what's going to happen in the future, but also what's happened in the past. Historical sin, punishment, and reward are original Jewish ideas. Just as the individual is responsible, listen to the words very carefully before you jump. What's going on here? Listen to the words. Just as the natural individual is responsible for his own deeds, the group bears responsibility for the sins of the past. This is not to be equated with hereditary sin. The latter, meaning hereditary sin, as developed by Christian thinkers, is a metaphysical, objective quality inherent in human natural existence. That's hereditary sin. That's not the same thing as what he's talking about. We did not inherit the guilt of the sin of our forefathers, neither as lahavdol, the references to original sin, nor to other sins, but rather the historical component of responsibility does endure. And so he goes on. Historical sin signifies a historical category which asserts itself in historical continuity. The individual is not guilty of sins perpetrated by past generations. The historical group is responsible for historical errors and sins committed by the fathers, because the latter repeat their existence in their descendants. And lo and behold, the same pasuk that by Dr. David Applebaum quoted in his beautiful, if very sad, especially in retrospect, final Kol Nidre address at Hol Rivka in Yerushalayim Ir Hakodesh, the Rav here quotes the same pasuk. Right? And they who confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers with their trespass with which they trespassed against me. In other words, the Rav says, the fact that we have the notion of zichronot, and we say atazocher ma'aseh olam regarding the Ribono Shel Olam, means that we bear responsibility for what's happened before. Not guilt, but responsibility. The downside of that is, what did I do wrong? It's on somebody else. But what's the upshot? I'm sure you understand. We can fix it. The authentic historical figure, next page, the authentic historical figure suffers for the past and fully relives it. As was emphasized above, the amalgamating force which unites generations throughout the ages is the ethical ideal, which can never be fulfilled, or it can't completely be fulfilled. This ideal discovered by the charismatic personality, he means here Avram Avinu, he means here Moshe Rabbeinu, to whose realization he dedicated himself and his clan, perpetuates the existence of the founder. As long as the ideal has not materialized, the charismatic personality cannot die, for its life was given to its fulfillment. The clan or nation which carries on identifies itself in a pre-logical feeling with its father. In other words, we stand before the Ribono Shel Olam as Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu, our God and the God of our forefathers, but not in a historical past, but very much in a living present, living through us, living spiritually and more so within us, carried by us. So the Rav goes on to explain this in relation to Tchiyat HaMeitim, resuscitation of the dead. The first concept of immortality, as coined by Judaism, is the continuation of a historical existence throughout the ages. It differs from transcendental immortality insofar as the deceased person does not lead an isolated, separate existence in a transcendental world. So in other words, immortality, before we get to anything about transcendental immortality, which means that the neshama continues in another existence with some other form of life, not a physical form of life, comes a historical element which keeps the neshama very much alive in this world, the legacy alive in this world. The identity persists on a level of concrete reality disguised as a people. I was surprised here, by the way, that the Rav didn't just invoke the expression that you find so often in the Tanakh, particularly in the early books of the Torah itself. You find the reference to a person passing away. It says in the Torah, Vaye'asef el amav. They were gathered into their nation. So the question always comes up. You can say that with regard to all people in the Jewish nation. But how come it says that about Avram Avinu? What nation is there? He's gathered into his nation. He's the first person in the nation. You can answer, sorry, Yemenu predeceased him. Okay, maybe. Or maybe it means he was gathered unto his nation in the sense that the Rav is talking about here. Not a nation that already was and is joining souls in Shamayim, but a nation that will be. And if you need any better proof, Vayasef El Amav, Baruch Ata Hashem, Magen Avraham. 3 times a day, no exceptions. Yeah? So to read the line again, the identity persists on a level of concrete reality disguised as a people. It asserts itself in the consciousness of the many who trace their roots to the one. Yet metaphysical immortality is based upon historical immortality. The notion that the neshama keeps going, the Rav says, yes, that is true. The neshama keeps going. Ways we don't understand. Metaphysical immortality means the neshama goes to the olam ha'emet, right? To the alma dekushta, as referred to in the Sifrei Kodesh, to chaya olam haba, different definitions. Is olam haba just another place? Is it also another time that we're all getting towards? And that'll be the union of the two. This ayin sham, the Rishonim, not for today. But the point is that notion is based first on a historical immortality, which means Bahai Alma in this world, there is also perpetuation of the neshama. Whoever does not identify himself with a historical ego and remains on the natural level cannot attain immortality. Meaning, if you only see things from the perspective of nature, there was a soul here, a body here contained a soul. It left. Where did it go? Oh, it's not part of the world anymore. So you're missing it. You're missing it. That's not what we believe. Au contraire, writes, the first conquest of death takes place in the realm of history. That the neshama goes on to the other world? Yeah, okay. But there's something more basic, more direct, and it's here. Worthy of note, says the Rav, is the following rabbinic statement in the Gemara Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadi Amud Bet. From where do we know, says the Gemara, that belief in the resurrection of the dead is a concept in the Torah, as it says, and you shall give of it the Lord's gift, meaning Truma, to Aaron HaKohen. Is Aaron alive forever? Is it possible to give Truma to someone who did not enter the land of Israel? Rather, this teaches that Aaron, will live again, and Israel will give him their Truma. From here, we learn that the resurrection of the dead is a concept in the Torah. Further along, the Gemara says, we learned in a Braita, Rav Simlai said, from where do we know that belief in the resurrection of the dead is a concept in the Torah? As it is said, and I've also established my covenant with them, the patriarchs, and to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their sojournings. It does not say to you, i.e. the descendants, but to them, i.e. the patriarchs. From here we learn that the resurrection of the dead is a concept in the Torah. Says Rav Soloveitchik, our rabbis singled out the unique biblical usage of the name of the founder, Aaron or Avram, Aaron, Avlu Kohanim, right? Avraham Avinu, for the identification of the group, and concluded from them that the founder is immortal. The argument is comprehensible only when we consider it from the viewpoint of historical perpetuation. The land was promised to Avram, Truma to Aaron. The realization of this promise did not occur in their lifetime, but many years later, and yet the word of God came true. Didn't it? The Kohanim still received Truma way after Aaron was no longer alive. Avram Avinu and the Avot received promises about the land of Israel. Kachave. Yeah. Will they be back at the end of days? Sure. That's true. Does that defy my rational, natural understanding of the world? Sure. But that's what it means to have a emunah pshuta and tchiyat hametim. That's what it means. But the Rav is saying there's something else, though. The continuity from their life until today, you see there is a historical element of immortality that's going on at tchiyat hametim. Why? Concludes the Rav. Because the founder continues his existence throughout the history of his group. Whatever is realized in the cause of the historical occurrence is to be understood as a personal attainment of the founder. It's fascinating then that in the Amidah, the first bracha ends, Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avram Avot, and the next bracha ends, Baruch Atah Hashem Mechai Hametim. Where's an example of Tchiyat Hametim? The Avot. And everyone who came before. Us. If we live with that historical consciousness. Yeah? I could have given you other Gemaras also, the Gemara in Tanit, Yaakov Avinu Lo Meit, right? The discussion in Tanit Daf Hey. And right, Lo Meit, it says he was interred. Is he buried alive? Right? Of course he's dead. No, but as long as his progeny is alive, Yaakov Avinu is alive. The Rav could have quoted that also. He wants to make a particular point here, not just about the continuity of her legacy, but that it really, from our perspective, is they're in the spiritual sense, they're still here now. The legacy is still open. We still fulfill it and uphold it as such. In the Sefer Hasidim, many generations later, he talks about the issue of the kapara, that those who have left the world still require, the atonement, right? Even of those all the way back to those who have left Mitzrayim, right? How could that be? How could the Maaseh, that's happening now be mechaper and someone who didn't do this in their own lifetime? Yeah. What about the notion that everyone only is responsible for their own actions? That's a very Jewish concept. So what does this mean? So if you look at the underlined section, we'll time to read the whole thing inside. Vim ha'avot tzivu labanim lasod dvarim la'achar motan harek she'asu habanim ke'ilu yasu ha'avot. When the forefathers commanded their children something, to do something after they died, and they do it, it's as if the parents did it. You understand where this is going? Wait a minute. Before we get to that, and bring it back home to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, etc. Intergenerational communication. We have the reality, and also Parsha and Elul, right? Parsha Kitetse, Parsha we know very well. It's a beferish pasuk. You cannot put to death a child for the parent's sin, or a parent for the child's sin. EFSAR. Everyone stands judgment only for what they've done or not done. Chazal learned from here that also parents can incriminate children, children can incriminate parents, can testify against each other. But the basic understanding, the level of pshat, everybody stands by at the bar of judgment on their own. Yet, pasuk and Sefer Shmot, also that we're going to be reading part of in the Yud Gimel Midot HaRachamim, 13 attributes of mercy. We're going over and over again. After 13 attributes of mercy, what does it point out? Pokaid avon avot al banim val bnei banim val shilashim val ribeim. God's going to hold to account all the future generations, the sons, the grandsons, the great-grandsons. Why? How could both these things be true? So a few things. First of all, the first pasuk refers to in the earthly court. We can never mete out justice intergenerationally. The latter pasuk, which really earlier on in the Torah, is in the heavenly court. What are God's calculations? Apparently there is some kind of responsibility one generation to the next. But the truth is, Chazal were bothered by this question. The Gemara in Brachot on Daf Zayin already points out, Poked avon avot al banim, yet uvanim lo yumtu al avot. Right? So what are you supposed to do? If you look at page 6, the bottom, you have it there. Oh, I think you lost I clipped out the English. I'm sorry. Okay. Uraminan, Karaya Hadadi. Right? These two verses, these two psukim totally contradict each other. What are we supposed to do with that? Yes or no? Umishanina and Lokash. It's not a question. Ha, when is there going to be a no responsibility one generation to the other, everyone standing on their own, atomized, when they don't do what their forefathers did? But if they do exactly what the forefathers did, so then they're just following in their footsteps, and they'll suffer the consequences. Meaning they didn't learn the right lessons; they learned the wrong lessons from their forefathers. Everything's connected. Everything's connected. Cuts both ways. Representation in a positive sense, but also responsibility for things that have happened in the past. Before we move on, I just want to point out that, and Dr. Applebaum actually quoted this, and it's really very, very hard to even understand, to read it. He said this in 5763, he quoted the Netziv on those psukim about confessing the sins of their sins and their forefathers' sins. That was back on page 4 in the sources. So you look at the Hemek Davar, what does he say? Page 4. It's on the right-hand side. It's the not the main text, but the inset. They should confess their sins when they're in exile because they were thrown out of the land of Israel. What sins? So it says the Netziv of Volozhin, b'sinat chinam, baseless hatred. Sheyadu gam hema shehu lahem la'avon, because they know that it is perpetuated from previous generations, and they know that it's their sin. Yeah. And also the sins of their forefathers. God was giving them providence in a positive way to give them good things in the land of Israel. But now, as a result of Sinat Chinam, intergenerationally, now God's will was carried out, but the opposite way. That's what it means, the trespass that's happening here. Yeah. And it's really very shocking in a certain way to read, given everything that's going on. Rabbi Dr. Applebaum quotes even the idea that any generation didn't have the Beit HaMikdash rebuilt in its time, as if it was destroyed in its time. What does that mean? It means, are we going to correct what happened in the past or we're not? And if we don't, then we've just inherited what came before. Again, it's not personal guilt, but it is a certain historical sin, historical sense of responsibility in the group carrying that responsibility. This is true also on the family level. I gave you on page 7, very fond of it, quoted it a number of times in the last 15 years, or at least the last 10 years, I should say, since it came out. This is became a book, but it was originally an article by this fellow Bruce Feiler, who talks about the way families talk about the stories of their family. And families that know more about their story and understand it in its truth and its nuance and its ups and downs, those are the healthiest, most resilient families. So some have the ascending family narrative, some have the descending family narrative, right? Rags to riches, riches to rags, or some variation thereof. But the oscillating narrative, that's the one where we talk about being able to understand that there are ups and downs. I would submit that in Slichot, we're acknowledging that it's not just been ups, morally and spiritually, for us or for Klal Yisrael throughout the ages, even our own forebears, right? And the point here is, and this is the punchline, if you will, on this side of things, but no matter what happened, we all stuck together as a family. Yeah. Even when times were tough, even when we've been through a lot, even when it seemed things were falling apart. Well, we've gone through tough times before, and we're in tough times now again. Maybe a bit different tough times, but the point is, tough times have come to us as a family, nationally as well. A theme I'll be returning to on the Yom Noraim this year, especially once again, but with greater urgency even than last year. So just for consideration. We want to refer to the open books. The question comes up, since it's a holiday, I gave you bottom of page 7, top of page 8, is the Gemara in Erchin and Daf Yud. The angels ask Hashem, why aren't we going to sing a Hallel? The Jews should sing Hallel. It's a holiday, it's festive. Rosh Hashanah. So what does Hashem tell the angels? Efshar melech yoshev al kisei hadin v'sifrei chayim v'sifrei meitim petuchim lefanav v'yisol omrim shir lefanai. The king is sitting judging the people. Now that they're going to show up and they're going to sing a nice song, a hallel celebration. And the books that are referenced here are the Sifrei HaChaim and the Sifrei HaMeitim. Well, I once heard from Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter, Moriv Rabbi, who heard from Rabbi Yosef Adler, who said he heard from the Rav, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, that it's referring to this, like the Yizkar, that the accounts are, even of the people who have died, is still open. Not it's the book of who's going to live and who's going to die, but the books of those who are alive now and the books of those who are dead now. All the books are open now. And on Yom Kippurim, Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippurim, it's a time of judgment, of a reassessment, of din. From the Yom HaZikaron, that is Rosh Hashanah, of Zichronot, Zocher HaBrit, to Zechor Brit Avraham Vakedat Yitzchak, as we're going to say. We're saying in the Slichot, through Slichot, and of course on Yom Kippurim as well, in the Ne'ilah. And that's the concept here. And we're thinking about this theme. And therefore, the idea of Yom Kippur appeal moves beyond the actual words Yom Kippur appeal as a title on a fundraiser. It turns out the appeal is not only an appeal to Shamayim for us, but also for them. It says the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Resh Chaf Aleph Sivav, Nagulidor tzedakah b'Yom Kippurim ba'ad hametim. The tzedakah is for those who have died. Adds the Ramah from the Mordechai, umazkir nishmoteim da'ametim gamkein yesh lehem kapar b'Yom Kippurim. They also get atonement. There are consequences to the actions that we take in this world that live on, despite whatever the bard, whatever Shakespeare wanted to say in Caesar, Lahavdol Fe'avdalot. We do believe the consequences, l'ra and l'tov, continue. But those that are not good consequences still need kapara. Says the Beit Yosef in the name of the Mordechai, filling it out. In Shoftim, the proof is where it says in Egla Arufa, in the Parasha Kapal Am Chaisel, Elu Achaim Shepadita Elu Hametim, Milamed Shametim Tzrichim Kapara, what we learned earlier. That's Paskin Lahalacha. From Rashi's base medrash, Machzor Vitri, Rabbeinu Simcha of Vitreux, wrote up the Shiurim and the Minhagim of his Rebbe. So he writes here, Poskim Tzedakah Barad Malachim Valametim, and Poskim Tzedakah Lametim B'chol Eretz Ashkenaz, Rak Hayom Levado. At least the Yizkar as a fundraiser of Tzedakah was only on this day. What day? Yom Kippur. Okay, then further along. Umash Poskim Tzedakah B'Yom Kippur Malametim Lefishu Yom Kapara Uslichu Mechil Kapara Hilahem. They're getting kapara. Shikachin Bapsikta. In the Psikta, one of the works of Chazal, it says as follows, quoted here in the Machzor Vitri. Shema Yomar Adam, the underlined part. Kevin Shemed Adam Ein Lo Takana B'Tzedakah. You might think since someone died, they can't fix anything through giving tzedakah. Israel. Yes, it says, give atonement to your nation, Israel, that you've redeemed, including those of you who've taken out of this world. Because they were at Yetziat Mitzrayim, that's good enough. Like a bow, an arrow, like the arrow is thrown, is shot out of the bowstring, and you ask for rachamim in this way. The tefillah itself, the tzedakah, that's given before Yom Kippurim. That's why Yom Kippur appeal really isn't supposed to continue after Yom Kippurim. And then the tefillah that we have. Okay. And then v'achar, the next line, not underlined, but here v'achar yifsiku al achayim. Then they have to also give tzedakah for the people who are alive. Lefi she'ein tanid below tzedakah. You have a fast day, you need to give tzedakah. Yeah. And he says, I'm reading B'Tana, it says in Masechet Tanya, v'chol mi shemit'ana ve'eno osa tzedakah ki lo makriv ola b'lo mincha v'zevach b'lo nesachim. He gave an offering without the attendant portions of the meal offering and the wine libation. You need that has to come along with it. The offering is ourselves. We don't eat and drink on fast day, but then we need these other elements. That's the tzedakah. We do that as well. So just to think what it means, Yom Kippur appeal is not just for us; it's actually for the Meitim, and also it's for ourselves. in terms of the fact that it's a day of Ta'anit. Are you with me so far? So far, so good? Next layer, a little more complicated layer, a few minutes left here. And that's the notion of children or sons bringing merit to their fathers. The Gemara here, and again, the English is the next page, but the Gemara asks, Mipnei ma lo manu et Amon, the king of Yehuda. Why didn't they list him on the list of people who have no share in the world to come in the Olam Haba? Perek Chelek is Kol Yisrael Yeshlam Chelek Lo Olam Haba, etc., etc. And here are the people who don't have a Chelek Olam Haba. And several kings of Yehuda show up on that list. Who doesn't appear? Amon. Why not? Answers, Mipnei Kvodashul Yoshiyahu, because he had a son named Yoshiyahu, who was a great tzaddik. Okay, so Menashe Nami, Lo Nimnim Pnei Kvodashul Chizkiyahu. How about Menashe, who's the son of Chizkiyahu HaMelech? Chizkiyahu was a great tzaddik. How come Menashe is also on the list? Why don't we say Menashe should not be on because his father Chizkiyahu was a great tzaddik for the covet of Chizkiyahu? Says the Gemara, Bra Mezake Abba, Abba Lo Mezake Bra. A child brings merit to their parent, but a parent does not bring merit to their child. It's a loose translation. It's really a father and son. But we would say, generally speaking, I think it's a stand-in for children and parents generally. Dichtiv ve'ein yadi matzil, as the pasuk says, none can save from my hand. And that's a pasuk actually from Parshat Ha'azinu. So the Gemara says, Ein Avram matzil et Ishmael, and Yitzchak matzil et Esav. There are limits. Parents cannot save their children. They have to stand on their own 2 feet. That's what the Gemara says. And the children, though, bring merit to their parents. You understand why this is spiritually and biologically, etc. We're descendant of our parents. So we inherit their genes, if you want to say it genetically. We also inherit their memories and their history. Now, it's not fate. We can move past it. We can fix it. We want to carry on the good portions, winnow out the portions that maybe were a little bit less than good. But there's also consequences to their actions that carry on in this world. And the tzedakah that's given, the prayers that are offered, bring merit to those previous generations. According to this Gemara, the pshat of the Gemara, as you see it right here in front of you, that only works in one direction. Children referencing the parents, because there's a legacy. What about parents bringing merit to their own children? What about that? Parents bring merit to their children? Is that possible? Is it ever possible? So we take the case of David HaMelech. So here in Shmuel Bet, the tragic story of David's son Avshalom, and the reality that Avshalom was certainly a most rebellious child, not quite a Ben Sora Mora. He was too old for it. He didn't do the things that are listed in the Torah that way. But if you wanted to use the moniker just loosely, what a rebellious child, right? Guilty of murder, guilty of various other kinds of crimes, certainly rebellion against his father. And after the rebellion is quelled, which many people die on account of Avshalom, Vayirgaz HaMelech Vayal Aliyat Ashar Vayevk V'cho Amar Belechto B'ni Avshalom B'ni V'ni Avshalom Mi Tein Muti Ani Tachtecha Avshalom B'ni V'ni. He keeps repeating again, my son, my son, my son, all things being equal. He's a renegade, he's a rebel, he's a murderer, he did terrible things, but he's my son. Remember that Avshalom killed another one of the children of David HaMelech. He killed Amnon for crimes that Amnon committed. And Yoav finds out about this, right? And he comes to see him, and people start running away because they see that instead of being happy that the rebellion was put down and they put their lives on the line to put down the rebellion, instead they hear that the king is sad that they won at the cost of Avshalom dying. It's a pasuk, hey, v'hamelech la'atet panav v'yizak hamelech kol gadol b'ni Avshalom, Avshalom b'ni b'ni. He kept saying it over and over and over again. He was aggrieved over his child. Says the Gemara, Masechet Sota Daf Yud, quoting the pasuk and quoting the 2 psukim that refer again and again, b'ni, 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 b'ni. How many times did he say b'ni? 8 times. Says the Gemara, Hani timnoya b'ni lama. Why did he say it 8 times? Shiv'ah da askim shiva medure gehenim. The first 7 times was to each time he said it, he brought his son out of a level of Gehenna. The idach, and the last one, the aite la'alma da'ati. The last one that he said, he brought him into Olam Haba. David davened for his son, who did not give him nachas in his lifetime. Au contraire, gave him nothing but agmas nefesh, whose legacy would be one of vilification for Klal Yisrael for a long time. Again, he was the one who not only fomented a rebellion, but put himself in the center of the rebellion and essentially chased his own father out of Yerushalayim, etc., etc. And now he davens for his own son, and it has an impact spiritually. Yes. So how do we reconcile the fact that the Gemara in Sanhedrin that we read before said that bra mezake abba, abba lo mezake bra, right? They only cut one way, and that you see that it's here. So the Bali Tosfot on this page were sensitive to this idea, and they find 3 different reasons why it would work for Avshalom. Why David could daven for Avshalom and it could work. Why could it work? Number 1, that Avshalom was punished in this world through the horrible way that he died. He had a very strange way that he died. His hair got stuck in a tree. The whole thing, he gets killed, the whole thing there. So that's one. Maybe there was a kapara in the fact that he died that way, and therefore maybe he deserved to go to Olam Haba. Number 2, Avshalom did many terrible things, but unlike some of the kings of Yehuda, Menashe, he didn't worship idols ever. Okay. But the third answer is very telling. We could also say that when it says in the Gemara, Abba lo mezake bra, when it says that a father cannot bring merit to his child, hanimishum kibud ha'av, right? That's because of the respect that the child should have had for their father. And if they didn't, they're being punished for sins. The other world can't put that on the father. The father's going to fix that. It's not a kibud av for this father to do that for the son. However, and therefore, ein monin milamanoto imrishayim below tefillah, and therefore, there's nothing preventing enumerating that individual among the rishayim, but add the Bali Tosfot 2 important words below tefillah, if there was no prayer. And I underline this line because it's so important. Aval tefillah mo'elet, but David hitpalel Avshalom. It's true. The children's legacy is not carried on by the forefathers by their action, all things being equal. But say the Bali Tosfot, all things are not equal. Because if the parents are davening for their child who has left the world, that would bring a merit to the child. The thinking of them, they're concerned for them. You know? And if that's the parent's decision to do that, then indeed they are perpetuating the legacy and bringing a kapara even to the child who has left the world. The Maharshal Chidushei Agadot writes something similar, quotes the Bali Tosfot, Afagav de Abba lo mezake bra, Kid Amar Perak Chelek, Moshkatva Tosfot Hacha, Harik Amar Kevin de Maseh Bat Sheva Garmalo, Moshkatv Hinani Mekim Begomer, Amar Kevin Shibeno Nenash Al Yado, Yizkenami Bishvila Halotim Bedure Gehenim. What does Maharsha say? You know why it was effective? I agree with the Bali Tosfot that he was the davening for one's child who has left the world is effective to affect the kapara. But you know what? On a certain level, even in the words that are spoken in these psukim, David is acknowledging why did his son become who he was? Because of certain things that David himself had done. Or not done. Shmuel bet, Perak Yud bet. Ko Amar Hashem says not to Navi David HaMelech. Ko Amar Hashem, the name of Hashem. Ko Amar Hashem says Hashem. Hinei mekim alecha rami beitach v'lakachti et nashecha leinecha v'natati l'recha v'shachavim nashecha leine Hashem meshazot ki at asita v'sater v'ani eser l'davar hazeh neged kol Yisrael v'neged Hashamesh. Who actually carried that out? Avshalom did. And on a certain level, when David is crying, B'ni, 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 he's an aggrieved father who on a certain level sees, on a certain level, not that he denied any responsibility on his son's part at all, but he sees some element of that traced back to actions that he himself perhaps had taken. And on that score, he's davening, you could say, not only for his son's legacy, but the way his son's legacies turned out because of him. And he realizes on that score, the book is still open. Indeed, and the Rashba and the Tshuva was asked about this, a long, long piece. I gave you just a little piece. Omnam misha oset tzedaka otfila be'ad misha kvar meit mo'il lamet. If you give tzedakah or you daven for someone who has already passed away, it is effective for that one who has passed away. Not limited to parents or children, anyone. That's what the Rashba seems to be writing. V'hu ma'amaram b'David, Melech Yisrael, she'amar b'ni b'ni. Masechet Sota, see their Tosfot they write there. V'zel ma shenag Yisrael b'tzdakot v'nichut nefesh. That's exactly what we've been doing. Yeah. And I think that's instructive for us to think about this line, right? We don't have time to see more of this, but just that idea. If you're going to give tzedakah, you're going to daven for someone who's passed away. So it's effective for the person who passed away. So says the Rashba, because actually in more ways than we realize, the books remain open. In closing, I'll just say that Rabbi Dr. Applebaum, Hashem Yikom Damo, his daughter Nava, Hashem Yikom Dama, both have a legacy that's carrying on. And I was so encouraged last year. I shared it with the shul on Yom Kippurim with this last piece where he says there's a second layer, and the second layer of what Anachnu Avotenu Chatanu, he says, is not just we and our forefathers have sinned. I'm on the last page now. We sinned, also our forefathers sinned. What's our sin? The matter of we and our forefathers. We and our forefathers, the unit of the unity of the generations. That's the problem. Maybe we haven't done enough to have the transmission of the Torah from Har Sinai through all the generations and into the future. He said in 5:763 on Yom HaKippurim night to the people in Ol Rivka, therefore this is not only a matter between living and dead, it's also something that has to do with me and my children, my sons and my daughters, may they live. Lihitvadot bekavana, to have in mind the kavana when they're confessing of anachnu avotenu, ani vehem, me and them, the intergenerational communication. Ani baruch Hashem eineni ben hametim, I am not, he says, among the dead. Ani yachol litvadot ba'atzmi, I can give my own confession. Ein tzorach shabana yitvadu avuri, they don't actually have to give the vidui for me. Footnote 22. The editors, the family wrote, when you realize that this was the last drasha he ever gave on Yom Kippur, he didn't make it to the next year. These are shocking words. And they write, Anu mekavim, ki bepirsum dvarav limudam, by publicizing his words and learning them, anu mekaimim legabav mashu me anachnu v'avotenu. We can fulfill something here of us and our forefathers. And I think that's a charge for us now in Elul. 20 years later, when the nation in so many ways seems so riven, when the stress seems to have reached, I hope it doesn't reach any farther, but already what seems like a feverish pitch among Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael. So he writes, the Rabbi, Dr. Applebaum concludes by saying, he told the people, strengthen the bond intergenerationally. Shipur achipus. The way to do this is uniting through the learning of Torah. More and more searching and understanding of learning Torah, written Torah, oral Torah. Next inset here, v'chizuk haTorah shenitna b'sina l'dor ha'hemshech, and strengthening the Torah that was given at Sinai to all of the future generations. Hava kulanu nitkavein b'vidish lanu b'yom kippurim hazeh aval anachnu v'otenu chatanu. When we say these words, you have a kavana, all of us, lakal gam hashra'a, take inspiration, and to learn from our forefathers, to go to a higher spiritual level. May within our midst, may baseless hatred be removed. May every negative attribute be removed. The gam nashu, we should also do tshuva in Kabbalah Torah hamurevet bein avotenu uvanenu, which is intermingled, interwoven between our forefathers and us. V'nechatem l'chaim tovim va'arukim, should be sealed for a great long life. Bebriut hanefesh v'haguf, with health for our souls, for our bodies, right? The Shnat Shalom, a year of peace. Kidum ishi, personal progress. Ruchani, v'gashmi, both in the spiritual and the physical realm. Lanu l'mishpechotenu, for us and our families. U'lishchinenu, u'lechol ha'am hashochein b'tzion, to all of our neighbors and all of the nation that lives in Zion and Zion. U'lechol am Yisrael, for the whole nation. L'kiruv ha'geula u'binan Beit HaMikdash, in order to bring close to the redemption, the building of Beit HaMikdash. U'hitpatchuyot marshimot b'limud haTorah l'chol echad ve'echad, and to have more, yet more, making more of an impression through the development of our learning for each and every person. So 20 years to the day, Yud Gimel Elul, Zechuto Yagen Aleinu, Zechuta Tagen Aleinu. May their merit be a blessing for us and for all of Israel. May it be their merit protect us. And we should think about them a little bit when they're going to say Slichot now, on the time of Slichot and the time of through the Aseret Yemei Tshuva and Yom Kippurim, Aval Anachnu Vavotenu Chatanu, but also Anachnu Vavotenu, we're hopefully worthy of the kapara of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through our acts of tzedakah and our acts of tefillah, our kiyum of mitzvot, and of course our limud of Torah. So Tehei nishmat and surah b'tzor hachayim. Okay, so that's our talk for today. Helen, you've been so quiet today. I'm not sure why. We didn't hear from you. Oh, because I didn't let you unmute yourself by accident. Sorry. Anyway, thanks for joining. Appreciate it. I'll see you on Shabbos, God willing. Okay, all the best. Take care.